Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, the personal, professional, and career development podcast. I am one of your co-hosts. I am Dr. Joe Hamlett, and alongside me is Dr. Dave Peltz. How are you doing, sir?
Most excellent, Dr. Joe. Thank you very much, sir.
All right. Well, as you can see, if you're viewing this, that we have a special guest today, and I'm really excited to have Mr. Blake Rudis on the screen here or on the podcast with us. We go back a ways, and it's good to reconnect and see him. So, Blake, thanks for joining us on this podcast.
Absolutely. It's an honor to be here. Thank you. I'm gonna call you Chief. I can't call you anything else. So
Yeah, so that goes back to the days when we were in the military together. So that's how far back this goes. I know he looks a lot younger, inspired than I am, and more handsome. But yeah, we were serving at
Wait,
the
wait,
exact
me,
same
me or
time.
Blake?
Of course, not you. So.
I haven't seen my chin in 3 years, so I don't know. There could be something under there.
Well, again, I'm looking forward to this episode, as we always do with our guest on here, and they bring a different perspective. So, again, thanks for tuning in. And if you this your first time, thanks for joining us. Hopefully, you'll get something out of this episode. So, I'll give Blake a few minutes to go ahead and introduce himself because we both know him now, and so we'll give Blake a few minutes to go ahead and tell us a little bit about himself.
Sure. So we met obviously when we were in the military together. I served 20 years in the Air Force National Guard, a big chunk of that with Chief Hamlet. And while I was there, I was working towards a YouTube channel and a blog that I kind of thought was just cute at the time, but then it turned into this, as things evolve online, it turned into course material, subscription websites, and quite a few things that became a business over time. That is kind of weird as an artist to say that, but I'm a traditional artist. I went to school for art, printmaking, and sculpture. Somehow that got me onto the photography path, and now I teach photographers all over the world how to make their images better in Photoshop. So I typically teach at the like 301, 401 level, I guess.
Okay.
Beginners come to me and they're like, "Yeah, you lost me at hello," and but then intermediate to advanced individuals are they're right there with me and they love it. So that's pretty much what I do. I just teach advanced Photoshop and photography, and I love it.
Wow. And again, it's been an honor to watch Blake progress in his business and everything he's done. So again, it's an honor to have him on the podcast. So thanks for the introduction. And again, I think we'll have a good time with this podcast. So for that, now that we're done with the introductions, we'll go ahead and jump right into our topic, which is removing labels. Right. So we want to start with Blake and kind of identify what he thinks of when he thinks of removing labels.
Yeah, so I think as a society, we tend to want to put things into categories and categorize just about everything, and a lot of times we even put people in those categories, and sometimes we can label people incorrectly or label people correctly. And what stands out to me is back in sociology class, way back in 2002, is probably the only thing I ever listened to in that sociology class. But I'm just kidding. I really enjoyed it. The teacher said that traditionally people who go to jail for something that they were wrongly accused of and serve that entire sentence out will get released and then go out into society and do what they were labeled as while they were in prison. And then they go back to prison because of that, even though they were wrongly accused, possibly not, possibly innocent. Um, so the impact of that to me at that time, especially at such a young age, was like, wow, that's how powerful a label can be. That somebody who didn't do something can get labeled as that and then follow through with that path. So whether that's an extreme example, but even if you think of like how I grew up as probably middle class without the what I thought was even the possibility of having the possibility of making my own business or making something of myself because of labels that were put on me. It happens in high school with bullying. It happens with people who are into a certain category. You can labels can become a negative thing, but they can also be a positive thing as well. So I really do aspire a lot to how I label things and how I remove labels from things. And I do that a lot in my own business as well. So a lot of people who come to me are usually retired. Um, Possibly they could be dentists, lawyers, doctors, or anybody for that matter, that was labeled as, this is what I do. I'm an engineer, so I don't have an artist brain. You can call me an artist all day long, but I am not, I don't think I can ever take that title. So usually we'll email a couple times and I'm like, no, I think you are an artist. If you're taking pictures, you're an artist. I think if you start to label yourself that way, you'll start to understand and you actually start to get better at what you do because you're labeling yourself positively towards the craft that you're working towards. And perfect example is one of my subscribers, John, who reached out to me about 4 years ago, said, I'm an engineer, I'm an architect. I like photography. And you tell me that I'm an artist in a lot of your videos. I don't believe I'm an artist photographer. I don't think you can never make an artist out of this engineer. And about a year and a half ago, he emailed me and he was like, I was wrong. I'm an artist and I've taken that label. But I've watched John's work go from being like, okay, that's all right, to being like, wow, like he's making my jaw drop. So just for him to say, instead of me taking on this label of engineer or architect who cannot be a creative artist, once he dropped that label and accepted another label, doors open for him. So I think that there's a lot of power behind labels. And really what it comes down to is, if you really think about what the label is, it's how we categorize ourselves or how someone else is categorizing us. So we have to be really careful about the category that we put ourselves in and what we believe about ourselves, whether we gave that to ourselves or somebody else did.
I'm sorry, Blake.
Yep.
You made some really good points, and I love where you're going with this, and I'm glad you clarified and explained what your take is on removing labels, because when we first started the discussion, I thought we were talking about taking stuff off of like soup cans or something like that. so I really had to switch my brain around a little bit to get up back in the game. But you said a lot of really important things, and I think the last example that you gave of, I believe it was John, was he didn't think he could until he started doing and accepting himself to be able to do other things. And then that's when he started becoming more successful. And I think that is very important, because so many of us are, either working or living a certain way, either because our parents or our family said, oh, you come from doctors, you're going to be a doctor. Oh, you're a lawyer, you're going to be a lawyer. You're a tradesperson, you're going to be a tradesperson. There's no college for you, there is college for you. And those are just mindsets that we subscribe to and buy into in those moments, and then hold on to for whatever reasons. I'm going to give an example real brief about myself. I've mentioned this before. I grew up, I came from humble means. I didn't believe I could go to college. I didn't believe I was smart enough. I graduated high school with a C- average after taking my junior and senior year full of art classes. That's the only way I got my GPA up. So like you, I'm an artist, and I didn't think I had the intellect to do that, to go to college. And lo and behold, I talked to one of my, I got influenced by one of the guys at my first base who was going to college. He was taking statistics, and I was just like, wow, that's way over my head. And then I was in the reserves and met another gentleman, Dr. Dana Bidoff, and he actually was the one that showed me how I could go to school. And he said, just take one or two classes. So I took two classes, criminal justice and criminal law, and I did great at them. And then I took a break. And then I came back a couple years later and then started going to school while working full time and got my bachelor's, master's, took a 4-year break, and then got my PhD. So it's really that mindset and understanding and accepting whether you want to be able to do something and start doing it, or whether you buy into someone else's categorization that they've, or label that they've placed on you. Oh, you're a cop, you can't do this, because I was a cop in the military. Oh, you're this, you can't do that. And it's like, we can do whatever we want. And that's what intrigued me about this topic when Joe brought it up, and we were talking. It's like, yeah, I want this guy on the show too. And it's just amazing, because you two were enlisted just like Joe and I, and now you have a hugely successful business. And it just goes to show that you can't buy into labels, whether it's buying into the labels you put upon yourself, or those labels that people have applied to you and that you've consciously or subconsciously bought into.
And I think part of that challenge is that in most cases, a lot of people have already labeled us, and most times we accept that. For just like me, all those years in the military, all the things I had done, I was still just looking at myself as the average Joe. It wasn't until I started to recognize I had the ability to, earn a degree, some of these other things, and to make it to chief in the military, become an author, all those things. But you're right. It wasn't until I recognized and stopped allowing labels to stick, to basically start to write my own script. And that's why I've said, like you said, we talk about this all the time, just opening our mind to the possibilities, because power of suggestion is very strong. So if we again tell people you're only this, that's what they're going to believe they are, and that's kind of the experience sometimes my kids had, especially in their education journey. They were going to college, and for example, my daughter wanted to major in elementary education. The counselor, and she wanted to minor in mathematics. And the counselor told her, well, women don't do well in mathematics. Why don't you try Spanish or something else? And she's like, well, both of my brothers were successful in math, and I was successful in math in high school as well. So why did people just tell them they were going to be okay, but now you're telling me I'm not? And so if she didn't, if we hadn't, helped her understand that she could do what she wanted to do, she might have, rolled off into the sunset with a Spanish as her minor, and because somebody else placed that label on her, told her that's all she could accomplish or all she could do. So I'm now glad that I do recognize that I have the ability to do that, but not growing up, I didn't have that. Again, it wasn't until much later in life that I recognized that. So a lot of that labeling, I think, starts with other people, and then we start to accept and then start to follow that same suit and start to label ourselves, just like you said, Blake, with somebody saying, oh, I'm not an artist. I even think about that now that me and Dave are content creators. We're YouTubers, we're podcasters. But if you'd have said 5 years ago we'd be those things, we probably would have been like, are you crazy? I'm not doing that. That's not me.
Yeah.
I can't do that. But now again, we can label ourselves as that. So I think that's very interesting, that this whole topic, the idea of, that again, that power of suggestion is really strong. And a lot of times we buy into it, which is
But
unfortunate.
we have to personally believe it though. Like that's the thing, that's the
True.
hardest part. It's like my dad told me all the time growing up. I can still hear his voice. He's still alive, but he would always say, "Boy, you can do anything you put your mind to." Boy was a term of endearment with my father, but he'd be like, "Boy, you can do anything you put your mind to." And I always be like, "That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Like, does he really think I can do everything I put my mind to? And then, but as I've grown up, I'm like, dang, like he told me that my whole life, and he never faltered from that advice. And it's true because when I put my mind to it to say no, I'm not going to be those labels that other people have categorized me as, or the labels that I've even categorized myself as. I'm going to be whatever I want to be. I mean, without being delusional, you can do a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of work. It's a ton of work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. It opens doors when you just remove the labels and put the labels on that you want.
Yeah, and I like where you've said it several times, the plural labels. So we can have many labels, like Joe said, you know, artist, author, podcaster, business owner. We can have family man or family person, father, mentor, coach. We can assign as many labels as we want to ourselves. We just have to believe in that and follow through with it. And that's one of the things that Joe and I talk about a lot. I can say I'm a NASCAR driver, but if the only driving I'm doing is on the highway and getting pulled over, I don't think that qualifies, because they don't, that for some reason the tickets keep coming in and I'm like, oh, these aren't for the NASCAR race. Well, that's what I'm trying to qualify for. So
that would fall in the delusional category.
Yeah,
I think.
delusional category. Yeah. I could say I'm the best at whatever, and if I'm not doing it and committing to it and following through and working towards that, then that's not it. I can't say I'm going to be a professional bowler and I sit at home just playing video games all day. So you have to actually go out there and do and commit.
And it's I think it is kind of simple in theory, but it's difficult in practice. It's like a lot of people don't realize they always start things with I can't.
Right. Yeah.
So when you say I can't, you're already admitting to yourself that you're not going to do it.
Mhm.
But if you change that I can't, that simple flip is just I'll try.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the first step. It's not I can't do that because of this. It's I'll try to do that because of this, which is usually going to be the polar opposite of what the I can't is associated with.
Mhm.
So when someone says I can't be an artist because I've never been one, I almost think to myself, especially in my sphere of influence, I'm like, really? So you've got a camera, you're taking pictures, but you're not going to try and consider yourself an artist, which is the pinnacle of what we're doing. Okay. I mean, then you're never going to get to the pinnacle. You know what I mean? So, like, if you really want to get to where you want to be, I mean, this is kind of like an NLP concept. I'm not sure if you guys talk much about that or prescribe much to NLP, which is neuro linguistic programming. It's basically a way of mapping your mind to the path that you want to go towards, right? So you can pretty much make whatever you want for yourself. And a buddy of mine introduced me to this a long time ago, and he even said that their NLP, they sometimes have these NLP meetings where when you go to these places, you can't be who you are. You have to be who you want to be. So when you go to the party, you don't introduce yourself as, let's say back in 2014, Blake, the guy who was in the military. I would have to introduce myself as Blake, the photo educator who travels the world and speaks.
Oh
Mhm.
wow.
And then I would have to,
Okay.
that whole party would have to be around what I'm doing that I want to do in my future. Because a lot of times, if you can put yourself into a future that you've been to, that means that you've experienced it. And if you've experienced it, then you can conjure it up again and
Yeah,
again
that's that
and again.
positive mental programming to yourself. So if you
Right.
keep saying, I'm something negative about myself, then you're going to buy into it. Your mind is going to buy into it. Your body's going to buy into it, and that's what's going to happen. But if you utilize positive reinforcement to yourself, saying, "I am smart. I am this. I am that," your body's going to react and adjust accordingly.
Absolutely.
Wow.
It's
So,
a complete
so
shift.
you just mentioned that when people come to you and you help them redirect and saying I can't, but then flip it to I'll try. So is so that's the first step, I guess, that when you start to help people with that, where do they go from that after they kind of embrace that or grasp that concept? Where's the next step? What do they do after that?
Usually after I'll try comes I can, and then comes I
Okay.
did. So,
Okay.
it's a progression. But if you start with I can't and you just limit yourself with I can't, then you'll never get to I'll try. And then if you don't try it, you'll never get to a point where you can say I can. It's kind of like the other day my son's Nerf gun broke, and I was like, "We'll take it apart and we'll fix it." He's like, "Can you do that?" And I was like, "We've never done it, but
Yeah.
we can try." And he's like, "But have you ever built a Nerf gun?" I'm like, "No, but here's the thing. When we open this up, we'll take a look at the parts. I've seen many illustrated parts breakdowns. We'll see what we can do." So we take the Nerf gun apart, we unjam it, put it all back together. Of course, I'm sure my son was thinking this ain't gonna fire. But sure enough, we cocked it, we fired, and boom, it's been working ever since. So if I would have said, "Hey son, I can't do that because I've never done that before,"
Right.
then not only would I have let myself down because it's a challenge and I like adversity and I like to collect challenges, but I would have let him down because then that Nerf gun would have been recycled instead of actually being something he could play with. So
Right.
that went from I can't, in my head, I'm even thinking I can't do this. But I can't show that to my son because he looks
Right.
up to me. So I'm like, we'll try it, boy. If anything, we'll see what happens. We only got a spring in the eye, but we'll see what happens. So we ended up fixing the Nerf gun and it was good to go. But if that conversation started with I can't do that because I don't know the inside of a Nerf gun and I don't work at a Nerf factory, then it would have all been for naught. And he had just gotten, so it really would have destroyed him. That's a very small thing, but I think that's a small thing that anybody can practice regardless of where they are. It's those small things. It's kind of like in the military, I taught survival equipment. Survival equipment was my job, and then I did aircrew flight equipment, which was helmets, oxygen masks, night vision goggles, and stuff. But part of my job was to teach pilots their refresher training for survival skills. So if an aircraft goes down, they have to survive. The people that typically don't survive are the people that are like, I just want to get rescued. Well, that's a big goal. Getting rescued is your top goal, but that's your big goal. So if you sit there on a rock, let's say you're in that beach that you got right behind you, and you sit on that rock and say, I just want a boat to come and rescue me, you're probably going to become a skeleton on that rock. But if you're the other person who's like, I need to go into those woods, I need to find a way to build a shelter, start with something small, start with a water source, start with a plant that you can eat, and you slowly work your way towards that I'm going to get rescued mentality. The people who just want the thing and want it now, regardless of all the little things that lead up to it, they don't get it. It doesn't happen.
Right.
And then you just end up depressed because you wanted the big goal. Well, you didn't do anything about the small goals in between.
Right.
So how can you even try to get to the big goal if you haven't tried to accomplish any of the small things in between? So, I do that a lot in my business. Like when I think about my subscription website, it started out abysmal. I mean, it started out with 100 people in it, and I was charging $9.99. Like you can't feed kids on $1,000. But if I would have said, well, it's $1,000, it's not working, let me quit this $1,000 a month, it's not
Right.
paying the bills, I'm going to quit. Instead, what I said, well, that $1,000 is paying for, 2 car payments. So, okay, well, that's a perspective that I can work towards.
Mhm.
This is paying for 2 car payments. Well, then it got to the point that it was paying my mortgage. Then it got to the point that it was paying my salary. Then it got to the point that it was also had some overhead and I have some profit. So if I would have stopped when it was just a car payment and not 2 car payments, then I never would have gotten to the point where it's paying my salary. So, I think a big thing starts with let's look at things in perspective on how small they are and then work up on the small things to get to the big thing instead of just I'm going to build a business and it's going to be amazing. You guys know how hard that is.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It's interesting because you mentioned that immediate gratification piece, being rescued versus working towards, the longevity. You might want to be rescued and sit on that rock and, 30 days later you're that skeleton. But if you focus on survival, it might be 6 months, but at least you're there 6 months and then the rescue happens. And that's similar to education. That's similar to being promoted within a company, getting better at your skills, whether it's teaching or training or painting or whatever. It takes time. And then that kind of segues into my mind of, and Joe and I have had this conversation several times is, for many years, Joe and I tended to really take care of and look out for our veterans and our military people with our coaching and consulting. And I know for myself, I did a lot of pro bono work because I know what it's like being in those situations and struggling and not having someone that will provide you that little bit of guidance that you need or coaching that you need to get out of that rut that you're in or to take it to that next level. And with, when we think about that, it starts, if we pull that thread even more, we hear about people saying, well, that's so expensive to have a house painted or to do this or to do that. Why am I going to pay that person that much? And we've seen it out there so many times. It's, you're not paying me by the hour. You're paying me for all the years of expertise that I've had to accumulate to get to the point where I can do this for you or to show you how to do something or to teach you or to mentor or coach you. So, this thread about removing labels really extends very quickly. It has a very big ripple effect very quickly. The small things, that little pebble drops in the water and you get a little ring, and then bigger, bigger, bigger. Next thing you know, it's a faint ring, but it's still way out there. But you've done that. You've created that big ring. It's how big do you want it? Do you want it to be a tsunami? Do you want it to be, a thunderstorm? Do you want it to be a surf wave? What do you want it to look like? So
I think you brought up a very good point, Blake, when you're talking about the perception piece, because you're right. You could see it as, okay, this big mountain to climb, or you can see it as, okay, I get to this level of that mountain, I've accomplished something. Then if I go a little bit further, I'm going to get further up that mountain and accomplish another thing. And for me, that was a challenge back, years ago, where I would always look at things as that final, kind of like you said, I'm just looking for that big win, that big ticket item, and not accounting for all those things that it take to get there. And I struggled with that early on, as because it was a immediate deterrent for me. I'm like, no, it's going to take too long. I'm not going to do that. But now, since I have learned to, look at it differently, if I break it into chunks, I'm going to achieve more goals. I'm going to have more success than again waiting for that long strung out goal that I'm trying to reach. So I think that is very powerful, that perception piece, that if you really look at the accomplishments, the achievements along the way versus again looking at that long range picture, it'll make you appreciate it even more for that journey.
It's that try piece. And I used to tell, I do still do tell college students, or people that are thinking about going to school, if you start now, where will you be when you're done? Well, I'll be here doing this and this and this, but I'm not ready to go to school. And I'm like, it's like buying a puppy or getting pregnant. Usually it's never expected. You just start doing it, right? So, then it's like, well, I'm going to wait. And then it's like 2 years later,
Yeah.
I ask them how you're doing. They're like, oh, I haven't started school yet. I'm like, how many pay raises and promotions and opportunity have you been passed over by because you haven't been working towards that goal? And that's to Joe's point and to your point. You have to try and commit to this to keep going and follow through. It's not just a one and done. You just can't, it's not like, oh, I got lucky. I played the slot machine one time and now I can retire. Typically that doesn't happen. We have to work towards these things and commit to them and understand that it's an investment within ourselves. If we really want this, we will commit and label ourselves in a positive manner.
It's, we really do have to talk about, it's like we talked about neuroscience before we started recording, but you have to understand the brain. The brain wants you to stay comfortable. It does.
Yeah.
It wants you to stay in a place that's safe. It wants, we'll say your mind, because the brain is just an object, but your mind typically wants to protect you from going outside of your comfort zone to do things that are difficult. It wants you to be complacent. It wants you to say, oh, we could go out with our friends on a Friday night, or we could sit on the couch and watch Netflix because that's comfortable. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to protect you from doing things that are going to take you out of your comfort zone. That's what our mind does. And so a lot of times, we get hard charged. We get, like, I remember when I was really pushing towards my business, I had so much energy towards it, but then I'd be like, well, I mean, do I really want to work that hard? Because it's not easy. Like, we're talking about it as if, like, you can turn around and just do this tomorrow, and it's not. It's so difficult. And like, my whole goal was 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. And when I would search for how do we get 100,000 subscribers, there's all this stuff out there about how to get 100,000 subscribers. But really, it boils down to, you get 100,000 subscribers one subscriber at a time. Like, there's no magic button that's going to give you 100,000 subscribers tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
But it's, that sense of comfort that the mind just wants you to just stay even keeled and, collect that paycheck and come home and do status quo. That's what our mind wants us to do.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that's probably why you don't see, it's very rare. Like, for someone to go off on their own and become an entrepreneur and be successful in it, it's probably only maybe 2% of the people in the world. 98% of those people are going to stay in that comfort zone. And I looked at that as a challenge. I said, well, okay, I want to be one of those 2%. And when you look at it as that challenge and say, I'm going to target that 2%, that's where I need to be. Someone's already done it. You just have to follow that path to see how they got to that point. And it's a small build. I remember talking to Chief about this when we first started talking about stuff. I was like, the stuff with the internet is like the law of exponential growth. It's like, have you ever heard what would you take? Would you take $1 million right now, or 1 penny today doubled for 30 days? Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
If you take the $1 million, it sounds great. It's like, cool, I can get $1 million right now. Or I have to wait 30 days and you're going to double that penny. You think it's just a penny. It's not going to go anywhere. By the time that 30 days hits, it's $5.3 million. Right. So that's how the internet is. And I think a lot of us will stay with, if we credit this to going off and doing the thing that you've always wanted to do versus staying in the job that you are. Staying in the job that you are is the $1 million. Going off and doing what you want to do, that's the compound interest thing. But it's hard to put that faith in there that it's actually going to happen. But it does. It's like, if you're 1 degree off for a mile, it's not that big of a deal. But if you're 1 degree off for 100 miles, now you're really, that's how the law of exponential growth works on the internet, especially if it's an internet-based business. But I think with anything that you're putting your mind to when it comes to that, I think most entrepreneurs would kind of say that they can take a step back from things and see a certain level of clarity around what they did and say, yeah, you can do that too. And then that person's like, well, I can't because I'm stuck here. But, you get that level of clarity from that amount of experience of sitting in that woods for 6 months, building the shelters and surviving, rather than just trying to get rescued on day one.
We've got about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay. Well, a lot of information, Blake. And is there anything you want to leave our audience with? Any final thoughts or comments in reference to removing labels?
Yeah, the first and foremost we touched on it. Take I can'ts out of your mind. Like you can literally do anything you want. It just depends on how bad do you want it. And I think that's the assessment that you need to give yourself. Your assessment is not how good is the idea, it's how bad do I want it and how hard am I willing to work for it. And
Okay.
that's case in point number one, I think. So I think that kind of drives the whole thing home. You can remove those labels. You just have to have the mindset to want to do it. So take away the I can'ts, and that starts help building the and label yourself what you want to be. You know, don't hide behind things. I want to be this. I want to be the entrepreneur that makes $1 million. Okay, then you can do it. That's your goal. But now do everything it takes backwards to get to that point.
Yes.
And then you'll be just fine. You look at it 10 years from now, like I am, thinking, dude, it's a good thing you quit your job.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for that, Blake. Well, Dave, do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I mean, Blake did awesome. I love the conversation. We could sit here for hours and talk about this stuff. I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule, and joining us for this episode. So thank you so very much. We're very gracious for it. And yeah, I love that. Take the I can'ts out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only thing I'll add, and we talk about this all the time, is just opening your mind to the possibilities. You can be who you want and what you want to be. I think that's kind of been the focus of this podcast. Is removing those labels means that you can be who you want to be. If you want to be Superman, you can be. I mean, it's really just up to you defining what that looks like for you. So, like Dave, I just want to thank Blake for coming on the podcast with us. Again, we got to take some time, me and him get back together and catch up a little bit, because again, I have been amazed by his growth, his development, and where he came from, and where he's at today. So it's just been an honor to have you on the podcast and to again continue the friendship that we have. And like I say, hopefully we'll get together soon and catch up. With that, you can find Blake. We'll have his information in the description. So if you want to reach out to him, connect with him, follow his stuff he's doing, because it's amazing. I'm sometimes look at his stuff and I'm like, I'm not an artist. I immediately say that. So now that Blake has kind of helped me not label myself, I may look at it and say, okay, maybe I can do that. So thanks for that encouragement. But we want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And again, there's a ton of information out there that we've been putting out every week. So with that, we just want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.